So we're in a series called Learning from Learners. People in the Bible who are lifelong learners, and we can learn from how they learn about God. And Daniel is just such a good person to think about in that context. So we're thinking about the person of Daniel and the book of Daniel tonight. And I'm going to begin just by reading some from the opening verses of the book of Daniel in Daniel chapter 1. And I think those words are going to come up on the screen as well, through the kindness of my friend Luke, who took my poor PowerPoint that was practically illegible and said, I'll give you something better that we can actually read. So thank you very much for that, Luke. Oh, but before I begin, I'm going to give a little shout out to new friends of mine, Ruth and Juliet, and they're sitting there. Just give a little wave. And they're from Uganda, and they are from the linked school with St Mary Redcliffe School, and they've come to visit Bristol, and it's lovely to have you here tonight. A little round of applause for them. So here we are in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. And these he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Interesting background music there coming up. And then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and about to go to Bristol University, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. And he was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. And the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. And among those were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And the chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and the wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. And God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who's assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men of your age? The king would have my head because of you. And Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food, which is the first big buy-in for veganism in the Bible. Anyway, so the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. And to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding for all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. So first thing to say, really, is this is about people transitioning. Transitioning forcefully. They didn't have any choice in the matter, but they were taken out of their home and their culture in Jerusalem and taken to a very different place, to Babylon, which was kind of like the center, the most powerful city on the planet. It was kind of had its own culture. It was famous for the hanging gardens of Babylon. It had astrologers and magicians. It had a different spirituality. It had a kind of wealth and a decadence, and it was an extraordinary city. It's a bit like kind of being taken today right to the heart of New York, perhaps, or I don't know, whatever you think of a major metropolis. And there, the people of Jerusalem, who are the people of God, are finding, what does it look like for us to do life in Babylon? And there's 2 things I just want to say about those opening verses. The first thing is that times of transition happen to people. And some of them are voluntary and some of them are involuntary, but they are all opportunities, for good or for bad. So for some of you, you might right now be in a place of transition. It might be that you're new to the city of Bristol, that you've moved here for all kinds of reasons, for work or for study. And in that transition, you've chosen it, and it's an opportunity for all kinds of things. It's an opportunity for you to have some new experiences, to make some new friends, but it's an opportunity for God to do something new in your life. But it's also, maybe a transition is also a time to let go of things. You know, one of the things that we often find when people are coming away to university, and that's why Chris is so passionate about the welcome that we give, is that people have kind of come from a background that's very safe and very Christian perhaps, and then they find themselves in a completely different environment. I remember my own experience coming to Bristol in 1977 when I was a toddler to university, and you know, I'd come from, my dad was a Methodist minister. I lived in a Christian family. You know, the youth group that I was part of was a very warm, secure place. I found myself living with a whole bunch of guys in a big student house, 40 of us living there. I was the only Christian in the place. And the person I had to share a room. The person I was sharing a room with was really heavily into weed and was dealing weed. And the whole environment was just a bit of a culture shock from the Methodist manse, you know. And so what was God going to do with me in that environment? And I suppose for me, over that year, it was a time of testing of faith. Where was I going to put my friendships, my trust, my loyalty? And ultimately, a time where I came through to a place where I knew I really needed God if I was going to do the Christian life. I couldn't do it based on my background, my experience, my family. It had to be in the power of God in that environment. And so for me, that was a life-changing year. And it was a time of transition where God made possible for things to happen that may not have happened if I stayed where I was. But my own feeling about transitions is they're vulnerable times. And it would have been quite easy for me, because actually in that first year, I went to church about 8 times in that year. Because, you know, my mates weren't going to church. I wasn't part of a Christian union group or anything like that. And it could easily have been a time when I really wandered and drifted. And they're vulnerable times, aren't they? And every transition is vulnerable as well as an opportunity. When you send your kids to school, when you go to a new school, you've experienced that yourself, the vulnerability and the possibility. But aging brings transition. Retirement brings transition. Marriage brings transition. There's so many transitions. You are going to go through them. And I want to counsel you, first of all, in your transitions, note that they're happening and ask God to help you in those times, to show you what he's doing. There's a verse in the Psalms. The Lord will watch over your going out and your coming in. The Lord watches over times of transition. And the reason he does is because they're vulnerable times and strategic times. Make sure God's watching over your times by inviting him in. And also watch over the other people going into transition around you. Make sure that you care for them, support them, pray for them, and befriend them. You know, that newly married couple that you've given lots of space to because they just want to get on being married. They might be having a really rough time. Why not support them and stand with them? You know, that young person who's gone off to university and think, oh, they're having a great time. Why not get in touch with them and say, how's it going? You know. So, second thing to say then, the different culture to Jerusalem. What's it like to be in Babylon? Now, in the Bible, Babylon is not just a historical, geographical place, which it is. It also, throughout the Bible, stands for the culture of this world that is different from the culture of the kingdom. And if Jerusalem culture is meant to be kingdom culture, the place where God is honored and worshipped and people are serving and obeying him, then Babylon is like the center of worldly hedonism, wherever it occurs. And in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, in the letter of John, Babylon is a metaphor for the worldly culture. It's not literally Babylon. John writes a letter. I'm writing from he who is in Babylon, but he's not really in Babylon. He's probably in Ephesus or Rome or some other big Roman city. But Babylon, it stands for that whole system of this world. And a New Testament writer, a Bible writer would say, all right, you're in Babylon now, guys, because God's kingdom hasn't come yet on earth. Babylon stands for captivity. Jerusalem stands for freedom and liberty, where God is. And to be honest, the world is still in captivity to the spirit of the age, to the spirit that is not promoting the things of the kingdom, that's not for Jesus, the spirit of Antichrist. And I don't want to be too dramatic about that, but there's a sense in which the values and the culture that we live in, some of it is neutral, a lot of it is fallen, some of it is good. There are lots of great things in our culture for sure. But there's the potential in our culture for all kinds of things that can be infused by who the Bible calls the ruler of this age, which is the devil. And it's very easy for culture to become something which pulls us away from following God, from honoring him, for obeying him, of finding that kind of right living, that prosperity that comes out of being in harmony with the way God wants us to be, with his shalom. And for Daniel, here he's in Babylon, but he doesn't treat the city as a place that's just what awful things happen to me, you know. I mean, what a desperate situation to be taken away from all that you know and to be virtually a slave in this place. But what he does is, in that place, he seeks to honor God, but also to be a blessing and to be blessed in the culture that he finds himself. And people look at him and think, oh, you've got something to offer this culture. And I think that the thing that defines Daniel in Babylon is that he's going to be true to what it means to be a citizen of the kingdom, even though he's in an alien place. And I just want to say to all of you who find yourself in Babylon, you know, actually for me, I live in a little bit of a bubble. I live in a Christian community house. I live with 22 other Christians. I work for this church. Most of the people I rub shoulders with day by day are fellow believers. We share a value base. On the whole, the people that I live with and work with are not sleeping around, doing drugs or getting drunk, are trying living for cash. Only one or two of them do that. And so it's easy for me, you know, to feel I can see kingdom culture happening in my life. I can be encouraged in that. But Babylon culture is where most of us live. How do we live in Babylon culture? And the idea isn't that we just kind of back off and form a little bubble like a church leader like me. But the challenge for us in Babylon culture is, how can we see kingdom culture at work even in this place and see it transformed? And actually we believe that in this church we talk about city transformation. Rob this morning was talking about being salt and being in places where the salt could affect the culture. And here's Daniel in his culture. And he's got tremendous influence. He's right in the royal household. He's been qualified to serve in the king's palace. And though he has to learn the language and literature of Babylon, he does it with the spirit of someone who's a kingdom person. And I just want to encourage all of us today who are here today as followers of Jesus. I'd love it that wherever you are, whatever you do, your prime identity is a follower of Jesus as a kingdom person. I think that was Daniel's identity. He may not, you could take the boy out of Jerusalem, but you can't take Jerusalem out of the boy. You know, we'll find later on he's still praying 3 times a day like he did back home. He's still pursuing the God of his fathers like he did back home. And he's still living like a good Jew in Babylon. But he's not anti-culture there. He's infusing it with something so much so that he prospers and has influence. But the key is, what's my identity? And here's another key. He said, Daniel, it said, resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Verse 8, when you defile yourself, what it means is that things rub off onto you. Things become part of you that you don't want to be part of you. And in the time of Daniel, one of the hallmarks of defilement was what you ate. That was a big deal for Jewish people. They considered what they ate defiled them. Now, these days, we don't consider what we eat defiles us, unless it's a really bad pizza or whatever. I don't know. On the whole, we don't have that attitude towards food. But what is it that defiles us in this culture? What is it that we do that rubs off on us and that makes us less of a kingdom person than we would be otherwise? And there's plenty of things in our culture that can defile us. We're really alive to the whole sexual pressures that we're under, and that for many people, the pressure of what we watch, what we see, how we relate to people, actually is something that sets up a tension within ourselves. We feel a bit defiled by the very activities that we're engaging in. And for Daniel, I think if he was here today, he would have filters on his computer. He may throw away his smartphone because he thinks, I don't want to be defiled by what I watch. And there was a kind of guarding himself on that one. It might not be that issue. There's so many things that can defile us. Actually, the pursuit of money can be a defiling thing. It could be it could be drugs and alcohol. Actually, someone just shared with me today. There's just a little bit of concern about some of the culture, that people didn't seem to have much of a conscience about just drinking too much, as if it was just kind of a normal thing. And if that does become a normal thing, we become a little bit affected by that. I was talking with someone else today, and they're talking about something that happened between two people just because they'd had too much to drink. The Bible says, don't get drunk with wine, which leads to debauchery. Things happen that can defile us and that make us have regrets, and that's part of the thing that as followers of Jesus, we don't want to be like that in the world. It's not that we don't go to parties. It's not that we don't have loving relationships. We don't use technology, but we don't want to be defiled by the things that we're using. Rather, we want to be salt and light. We want to bring a difference and a change to the places where we are. There's something else about Daniel's journey, about being in Babylon and being able to be a kingdom person, and that is the power of the group. And you'll have picked up there was a little bunch of guys from Judah, and we know them best by Daniel. We call him by his Jewish name, but the others, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we kind of know those by the new names that they were given. But I think that these group of guys reinforce that sense of we are citizens of the kingdom. There is tremendous power in the group. If you want to keep your identity as a follower of Jesus, and you're with a group of other people who want to do that, you are much more likely to flourish. You're much more likely to be empowered. You're much more likely to make a difference. And here at Woodlands, we really believe in the power of a group. That's why we encourage people not just to come along to Sundays to worship, but to find that you are in a group of like-minded people who can disciple and support you. Now, some of those groups will be very informal. They'll just be the mates. I know some of you show up as friends from college or school or from university. And in a sense, you've got your group. No one's told you. No one said, right, we're going to assign you to a group. But if you're not in that position and you haven't got your own cultural group and group of like-minded friends, we'd love to help you find one. That's what our newcomers process is all about, actually. It's really driven by a desire to help people find a place where they'll flourish. But, over the history of Christianity, the group has been incredibly significant. There was a group in the 18th century that started at Oxford University. And it was started by a guy called Charles Wesley. And his brother John became part of the group. And another young guy called George Whitefield became part of the group. And it was called the Holy Club. And these were guys, the state of the church in 1725, 1730, when the Wesleys were at Oxford, was really bad. The Church of England was led by the wealthy junior family members of wealthy families. And they often didn't have any theological training. They didn't have a lot of interest. They just wanted a cushy job with a nice house. And the tithes got paid to the rectors and the clergies. So they were wealthy. They lived in wealthy houses. They wouldn't even preach. They would buy books of sermons and read a sermon. And they'd go hunting, shooting, and fishing. And the church, actually, in Wesley's day, the established church was in a mess. But the Wesleys and Whitefield were genuine believers. They got together this holy club, and there's some other people in the club. So as well as Wesley and John and Charles, there was and George Whitefield, there was this guy, John Gambold, a bishop of the Moravian Church. Benjamin Ingham, a famous evangelist in Yorkshire. Just a whole bunch of guys who were the holy club. And what they would do is they had 22 questions they would ask one another. They'd meet together 2 or 3 times a week. They'd read the Bible. They'd ask these questions, things like this. Did the Bible live in me today? Do I pray about the money I spend? Do I disobey God in anything? Do I insist upon doing something about which my conscience is uneasy? Am I defeated in any part of my life? Is there anyone who I fear, dislike, disown, criticize, hold resentment toward, or disregard? Am I honest in all my acts and words, or do I exaggerate? I mean, there are lots of questions there. 22 questions. What I'm going to do tonight, I've printed out 100 of these. And you might think, this would be a good thing for me to ask. Great question, which I ask myself is, am I defeated in any part of my life? What a great question. So these 22 questions, give them to my friend Nigel and my daughter-in-law Hannah, and anyone they care to give them to. If you'd like one of these, take it away. Do some, for your mentoring, grab them. You can give them out if you want to. He's hanging on to them. He's going to sell them. All right. Or you could take one on your way out, I suppose, if you don't want to give them out. All right, Simon wants one now. It's great to be part of a group, isn't it? So what else do we learn about Daniel and what it means to be somebody who can be a world changer in your situation? And think about you guys, like Daniel, young people who are going to be living in Babylon, but are people of the kingdom, and you're going to be changing the world and having influence. Well, he's got some natural gifts, hasn't he? It says about him he's really bright and studious, but he's also very principled, but he's also quite wise. And the way he deals with the kind of overseer is really wise, isn't it? Just give us a chance. If it doesn't look great, he's respectful. He has great social skills, I think. But the key about him as well is he's not self-reliant. He's got all these gifts. He is handsome, intelligent, learned, and all the things it says about him. But he's absolutely reliant on God. It says about Daniel that he can interpret dreams and visions. Now, actually, Liz Evans was mentioned earlier on and with the prophetic mentoring school. And Liz, one of Liz's kind of things that she's really wants to impart and teach is interpreting dreams and visions. And prophetic mentoring school is part of how to do that. And in the Bible, dreams and visions have meaning and purpose. And but Daniel, he interprets dreams. And the king of Babylon just has this incredible dream. The challenge is, he can't remember what it is. He kind of like wakes up, he knows it was a really significant dream. And so he says to all his wise men and astrologers and magicians, all the people from Babylon, I want you to interpret my dream, otherwise you're in big trouble. And they said, well, tell us the dream. He said, I can't remember it. And, they are in trouble. And he said, this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. But because Daniel was kind of linked with the wise men, he said, Daniel, you've got to help us. And God gives Daniel the interpretation. But this is what leads up to that. This is Daniel chapter 2. Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. And the king asked Daniel, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? And Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And he's shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the vision that pass through your mind as you lie in your bed are these. And he explains the dream and he gives him the interpretation. But that's his key. He's always saying, it's not me, it's him. It reminds me of Peter in the New Testament. When Peter is just heals the lame man and do you think as if by our power we could make this man well? It's in the name of Jesus. As someone who lives in Babylon, we're saying it all comes from him. I'm a servant of a different kingdom. I walk to a different drum. I've got a different Lord. What I've got to offer you doesn't come from my wisdom, it comes from his wisdom. If you think I'm doing life well, it's because I've got it from him. If you think I've got something to offer you, it's because it comes from him. And as As kingdom citizens, we're always pointing to the source of every good gift that comes to us. And Daniel was like that. And it's great to have to rely on God. And there's something about living in Babylon, knowing that we are, that means we have to rely on God. It's great. I've got a friend who's here tonight who spent 18 months living on the streets of Bristol. That's a long time, isn't it, to be homeless? And what for that person, God did a lot in his life at that time, because he had to rely on God, because he was living in Babylon. It's rough out there on the streets. And if God isn't going to help you, you're in big trouble. When we live in Babylon, let's not try and live in our own strength, but let's call on the power and the name of God. And I guess for Daniel, he's a lifelong learner. He keeps on, at the end of the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 10, it's just the same, you know. He gets a vision, and he just doesn't know what it means. And it says, at that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. In other words, he was fasting. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips. I used no lotions at all till the 3 weeks were over. And then he gets a revelation. But he's just all the time, that's how he's wired. He's dependent on God. A couple of quick things, and then I'm done. Daniel's not easy to corrupt. Even though he's in a place of high influence, character-wise, he's so consistent. There's a time when people are so jealous of Daniel's influence that they kind of have a conspiracy. They kind of set up something which they know will get Daniel into trouble. They encourage the king to worship, to make an idol that everyone's got to worship. And if they're not, they're going to be thrown in the lion's den, you know. And the king falls for it. And Daniel, you know, he's in Babylon, but his first allegiance to God, I will worship one God only. So he will not worship this. And it says about him, when Daniel learned the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he got down on his knees, he prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he'd done before. And instead of, he's doing that instead of praying to the king Darius, you know, and he's incorruptible. It says about him, they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. They have to make something up that's to do with the law of God. And the Bible tells us, if you're going to get into trouble, get in trouble because you're a follower of God, not because you're corrupt. Paul writes that to slaves in the New Testament. He says, look, if you're going to get beaten for doing a kingdom thing, not because you're lazy or a thief. And there is no guarantee that we will not get into trouble if we're following God with integrity. Sometimes integrity gets you into trouble because Babylon is a bit twisted, and sometimes it's more convenient to lie to get yourself out of trouble. It'd be quite convenient for Daniel to close his windows and not to pray to his God, because the rule was don't pray to anyone for 30 days except the king. But he's incorruptible, and that sometimes gets him into trouble, but it also gets him out of trouble because he relies on his God, a God who can close the mouths of lions. And I guess just finally, as we go into prayer week, Daniel was a man of prayer. And I've read 2 verses. I've read to you Daniel 6, where his habit is to pray. But when times get really tough, he prays a lot. And there, towards the end of the chapter, you see him having this extended 3-week kind of prayer and fasting thing. And Daniel has the most amazing prayers. You could go and read them out loud. I love some of Daniel's prayers, the prayers that you can read and prayers that you can... let me just read a little bit of a prayer of Daniel. This is Daniel interceding for his city. Daniel chapter 9, great prayer. It starts this. O Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with all who love him and obey his commands. We have sinned. We've done wrong. We've been wicked and we've rebelled. We've turned away from your commands and laws. We've not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name. And he goes on. And he just talks about how wonderful God is. And in his desire for blessing, he's saying, God, you know, it's on us. But we know you, and you're the great and awesome God who keeps your covenant and love. And he finishes his prayer as he's praying for his people. He says, give ear, O God. Hear and open your eyes and see the desolation of the city that bears your name. He's praying for Jerusalem. He's praying for an answer to an old prophecy of Jeremiah, 70 years on, that there will be a restoration in Jerusalem. And here he is in Babylon, a man of prayer. And the people that succeeded the Babylonian Empire were the people that restored Jerusalem, like Cyrus, that gave permission. How much was Daniel's prayer part of that? He goes on, he says this: "We don't make requests of you because we're righteous, but because of your great mercy. O Lord, listen. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hear and act. For your sake, O my God, do not delay, because your city and your people bear your name." Towards the end of his life, towards the end of his ministry, while he's been serving in Babylon, while he's had great influence and prestige in Babylon, while he's been like kind of almost like the prime minister of Babylon, here he is still praying for Jerusalem. His priority is Jerusalem. It could be that some of you in your lives will have great influence in business, that will accumulate great wealth, will work for multinational companies. Will you have a priority for Jerusalem at those times? Will you be praying for God to restore his church and his people? Will you be praying that God will make a name for himself? Will you do that, or will you be consumed by what you're serving in your secular world? I just want to encourage you as I come into land. It's wonderful that Christians have tremendous influence in the world. It's wonderful that the realm of business, the realm of arts, the realm of politics, that Christians go into those things. You might be a Bono. You might be a future minister in government. You might be a champion of industry. You might have a vast wealth. And over the centuries, people who've had the first love of Jesus in their life have been able to be in those places and change Britain. Some of the great social entrepreneurs like the Cadburys, people who had great wealth but followed Jesus, want to apply that in the marketplace. Fantastic. I think Bono is pretty good myself, really, in how he's coped with massive fame and money, but is known as someone who's a believer and who wants good to happen in the world. I know people mock him. What's the difference between God and Bono? God doesn't wander around Dublin and think he's Bono. It's a joke. It's a bad joke. People mock Bono, but holding on to integrity in that place is fantastic, isn't it? Will you be people like that? Will you, at the end of your life, when you succeed in your career, still be praying for Jerusalem? Will you learn to pray like Daniel did? Will you be someone who gets revelation, who sees angelic messengers? Who God says, look, you're so in tune with my heart. I'm going to send the Archangel Michael to help you in your prayers. It'd be great, wouldn't it? So I'm going to finish now, and we're going to have communion. But just going to say, let's learn from Daniel, and let's learn to be people of God in a world that needs the salt and the light. Father God, thank you so much that this is a room full of people who have some of those attributes that we've read about, people who can be world influencers, world changers, people who've got gifts and talents, people you're going to place in high places. But I pray that they always have their heart on what you're doing and your kingdom. And as we take communion, Lord God, as we go into this time of ministry, we want to reconsecrate ourselves tonight as followers of Jesus, where he has first place in our lives. Amen.